If your last name sounds short, simple, and easy to spell, but a relative once told you it used to be something longer, something foreign, something that got changed when your family arrived in America, you have probably heard the explanation everyone gives. An officer at Ellis Island could not pronounce it, so he wrote down something else instead, maybe out of impatience, maybe out of ignorance, maybe just because there were 1,000 people behind your great-grandfather in line and nobody had time to get it right. Here's the twist almost nobody knows. Ellis Island officials never had the authority or the paperwork to change a single name. Not once, not for anyone. In the entire 62 years the immigration station operated between 1892 and 1954. But your family's name almost certainly did change, just not there and not the way you were told. It changed later, sometimes years later, through a choice your own ancestor made. Quietly, deliberately, and usually for reasons that had nothing to do with a confused clerk, and everything to do with surviving and succeeding in a new country that was not always welcoming to names that sounded foreign. 20 surnames are in this video. Some belong to Polish families who dropped letters for easier pronunciation. Some belong to Jewish families who translated their names directly into English. And some belong to families whose new name was chosen specifically to disappear into a language and a culture that was not always kind to the one they had left behind. Is your surname on this list, or does it follow one of these patterns? Stay with me. Subscribe right now before we start. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with me. Number 1, Adamczyk to Adams. This is one of the most common and best documented Polish surname transformations on record. A truncation pattern where a longer Polish name with a distinctive ending gets shortened down to something that sounds naturally American while still preserving the original root of the name. Genealogical societies specializing in Polish-American research have compiled extensive lists of exactly this kind of change. And Adamczyk to Adams appears again and again across immigration and naturalization records from the early 20th century. A name change that let a family keep a phonetic connection to their original surname while making it instantly readable and pronounceable to English speakers who had never encountered a Polish surname ending before. Number 2, Lukasiewicz to Lucas. Following the same truncation pattern as Adamczyk, this name shows a Polish surname losing its patronymic ending entirely, the portion of the name that would have meant son of Lukasz in the original language, while retaining the core recognizable syllables at the front. This type of change was common enough that Polish genealogical researchers treat it as a distinct category of Americanization, separate from names that were fully translated or completely replaced, since the family clearly wanted to preserve some direct link to the original name rather than abandoning it outright, a middle path between full assimilation and total preservation. Number 3, Tchaikovsky to Tchaikovsky, and eventually to something shorter still for many families who carried this name. Before some Polish families shortened their names entirely, many first went through an intermediate phonetic stage, respelling the original Polish pronunciation using English letters and English spelling conventions, since Polish spelling rules do not match English ones at all. Diacritical marks, the small accent marks that change how Polish letters sound, simply do not exist on American typewriters or in standard English handwriting conventions, forcing an entire generation of immigrants and the clerks who processed their paperwork to guess at phonetic approximations that eventually hardened into new, permanent spellings passed down to every generation that followed. Number 4, Dabrowski to Dombrowski. This represents a specific and well-documented category of change, an orthographic adjustment rather than a full Americanization, where the accented Polish letters simply could not be reproduced by American record keepers and were replaced with the nearest available English letters that approximated the original sound. Genealogists researching Polish family names specifically flag this category because it means the name is not really changed in any meaningful sense, only respelled, which is an important distinction if you are trying to trace a Polish family back across the ocean using historical records. Number 5, Mlynarz to Miller. Unlike the truncation examples so far, this is a direct translation, the Polish word for a person who operates a mill translated word for word into its English occupational equivalent. This pattern appears constantly across many immigrant groups, not just Polish families, since occupational surnames translate cleanly and predictably between languages, giving families an easy, meaningful new name that still described exactly who they were and what they did for a living, just in a new language. Number 6, Kroll to King. Another direct translation, this time of a Polish word meaning king, chosen specifically because it converted a foreign-sounding name into a short, powerful, easily recognized English word with obvious positive connotations. Names like this were often popular precisely because they gave a family something to be proud of in their new language. Not just an easier name to spell, but one that carried the exact same meaning and the exact same dignity as the original. Subscribe right now because the next 14 names cover the direct Yiddish to English translations that turned entire Jewish families from cabinet makers and goldsmiths into their exact English equivalents, the shortened Jewish surnames that dropped entire visible ethnic markers, and the specific historical pressures that made changing a name feel less like erasing your history and more like the only realistic path to getting hired at all. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with me. Number 7, Myśliwiec to hunter. Continuing the pattern of direct Polish occupational translation, this name meant hunter in the original Polish and was converted directly into its English equivalent, following exactly the same logic as Malinar's becoming Miller. These occupational translations are some of the easiest immigrant name changes to research today, since the connection between the original and the new name is transparent once you know what to look for. And Polish genealogical resources maintain extensive published lists specifically to help modern descendants make these connections. Number 8, Goldschmidt to Goldsmith. This is one of the clearest and most frequently cited examples of direct Jewish surname translation from German or Yiddish into English, converting an occupational name for a goldsmith into its precise English equivalent, letter for letter, meaning for meaning. Etymological researchers studying Jewish surnames specifically point to this as a textbook case of the broader pattern where the European element of a name was fully translated rather than simply respelled, preserving the original meaning completely while making the name unrecognizable as foreign to an English speaker encountering it for the first time on a job application or a school roster. Number 9, Steinschneider to stone. Here, the transformation goes further than direct translation. Steinschneider, meaning stonecutter in German, was often shortened all the way down to simply stone, retaining only a fragment of the original meaning, rather than translating the full occupational term. Etymological studies of Jewish surname history specifically identify this abbreviated pattern, where the initial letter, or core syllable of the old name became the entire basis of the new one, a strategy that shows up again and again across many different original surnames converging on similar short, simple, unmistakably American replacement names that gave no outward hint of their European origin. Number 10, Finkelstein to Finch. Following that same abbreviation pattern, Finkelstein was sometimes shortened dramatically into Finch, retaining just the opening syllables while discarding the rest of the original German compound name entirely. Family history researchers note this as one of the more aggressive examples of the pattern, where very little of the original name survives except its starting sound, a level of transformation that can make tracing a family's original surname significantly more difficult without access to naturalization records, showing both names side by side, since Finch on its own gives almost no clue to its Jewish or German origin. Number 11, Moskowitz to Moss. Another example of the same aggressive shortening pattern, where a Slavic-influenced surname ending in the patronymic suffix witz, meaning son of, was reduced down to a short, simple English word, using only its opening syllable. This pattern of abbreviation was common enough among Jewish immigrant families specifically that etymological researchers treat it as one of several distinct, recognizable strategies, alongside direct translation and full replacement, each with its own internal logic, even though the end results share a common goal of sounding less identifiably foreign in a country where that mattered enormously for employment and social acceptance. Number 12, Kalisz to Cole. Following the same logic once again, a surname originally referring to the Polish city of Kalisz was shortened into a short common English name that shared only its opening sound with the original, completely severing any obvious geographic or linguistic connection for anyone encountering the new name without prior knowledge of the family's history, effectively erasing a visible link to a specific town on the other side of the world in favor of a name that could belong to anyone, anywhere in America. Number 13, Fleischhacker to Fleischer. Unlike the previous few examples, this change preserves considerably more of the original German name, dropping only the second half of a compound occupational term meaning meat cutter, while keeping the recognizably Germanic first portion intact and clearly visible. Researchers studying these patterns note that the degree of change varied enormously from family to family, some choosing to preserve as much of their original name as possible, while others sought a more complete transformation, reflecting different individual calculations about identity, safety, and belonging that depended heavily on where a family settled and how welcoming or hostile their new community turned out to be. Number 14, Mandelstam to Mandel. This represents a truncation that kept the more recognizably pleasant-sounding first half of a longer German compound surname while dropping the second half entirely, a common strategy when part of an original name already sounded reasonably approachable to English speakers and only needed to be shortened rather than fully replaced or translated into something completely unrecognizable. Number 15, Friedenthal to Fried. Following that same logic, this name was shortened to retain only its opening syllables, discarding a German place name element entirely in favor of a short, clean result that also happens to mean happy or content in German, giving the shortened version its own independent positive meaning even after the geographic reference was dropped. a small but meaningful bonus for a family choosing a new identity to carry forward. Number 16, Bernstein to Burns. This shortening is specifically documented in connection with a nationally famous entertainer, the Jewish comedian George Burns, whose Americanized surname became one of the more recognizable examples of this pattern in 20th century popular culture, demonstrating how these ordinary immigrant naming patterns eventually surfaced in the names of some of the most famous people in the entertainment industry, hidden in plain sight for millions of Americans who watched him for decades without ever making the connection back to his family's original Jewish surname. Number 17, Brockman to Brock. Documented specifically among Polish Jewish immigrant families, this surname traces back to a Yiddish word associated with the trade of paving, another occupational name that underwent both shortening and phonetic adjustment as it moved from one language and one country into another, following the broader pattern where occupational surnames were often the easiest and most common names to adapt, since the underlying trade itself often carried over into the family's new American life. Number 18, Sender to Saunders. This example shows a different mechanism entirely, a Jewish name derived not from an occupation, but from the personal name Alexander, gradually adapted into an English surname that already existed independently in English naming traditions, allowing a family to essentially merge into an existing English surname rather than inventing something new from scratch, a subtler and in some ways more complete form of assimilation than any of the shortened or translated names discussed so far. Number 19, Weissmuller to a shortened first name only. The Olympic swimmer and film actor known to the entire world as Tarzan was born Johann Weissmuller, and while his family surname remained largely intact, his given name was Americanized from Johann to Johnny early in his career, a reminder that first names underwent exactly the same kind of voluntary transformation as surnames, often even more frequently and more casually, since a first name is used constantly in daily life, shouted across a schoolyard or called out at a job site, and carries an even stronger, more immediate signal of foreignness or familiarity to everyone a person meets in a single day. Number 20, the pattern that connects every name on this list. Researchers studying naturalization records from immigrant neighborhoods in cities like Brooklyn have found that more than 3/4 of surveyed immigrants altered their names during the naturalization process itself, the formal legal step of becoming an American citizen, not during arrival or processing at any port of entry. This detail alone dismantles the entire Ellis Island myth on its own. If names were being changed at the border, there would be no reason for the overwhelming majority of changes to appear years later, tied specifically to citizenship paperwork that immigrants filed voluntarily on their own timeline, often only after they had lived in America long enough, worked enough jobs, and raised enough children in English-speaking schools to decide for themselves exactly which name they wanted to carry forward, permanently into the rest of their family's history. 20 surnames and patterns. The Polish families who trimmed patronymic endings to make their names easier to say out loud in a country where nobody else spoke their language. The families who respelled their names phonetically because the accented letters of their home language simply did not exist on an American typewriter or in an American schoolbook. The occupational names translated directly and proudly into their English equivalents. Miller, King, Hunter, Goldsmith, carrying the exact same meaning in a new language rather than losing it entirely. The aggressive abbreviations that kept only a name's opening syllable, turning entire compound German and Yiddish surnames into short, simple, unmistakably American replacements that gave away nothing of where the family had come from. The comedian, the swimmer turned movie star, and the countless ordinary families who made the exact same calculation they did, all following the same underlying pattern of voluntary reinvention that had nothing to do with an overwhelmed government clerk and everything to do with personal choice. And the naturalization records themselves, sitting quietly in federal archives, showing again and again that these changes happened later, deliberately and by choice, exactly the opposite of the story most families have been telling for 100 years. If your family surname sounds short, simple, or distinctly American today, but a relative once mentioned it used to be something else, there's a real possibility your family's name followed one of these exact patterns: truncation, translation, phonetic respelling, or aggressive abbreviation. And the real story is sitting in a naturalization record rather than a border crossing that never happened the way you were told. The National Archives holds millions of naturalization petitions, searchable by name, court, and location, many of them listing both the name a person entered the country under and the name they had adopted by the time they became a citizen, sometimes years apart. Family Search offers free access to naturalization indexes covering federal and state courts throughout the country, going back well over a century. And Polish, Jewish, and other ethnic genealogical societies maintain extensively researched published lists connecting exactly these kinds of Americanized names back to their original forms, built specifically to help descendants trace a family's surname across the exact transformation it went through, sometimes across several transformations spanning multiple generations. The records are free. The real story behind your family's name is almost always more deliberate, more human, and more interesting than a story about an impatient clerk who never actually existed at all. Subscribe right now if this video helped you see your own family's name in a completely different light. Every week on this channel, we go this deep into the real histories behind the names that shaped American families. Subscribe, like this video, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment below. Does your surname match one of these patterns, truncated, translated, or shortened down to a single syllable? Tell me your surname and what you believe the original version might have been. And if you have found your family's actual naturalization record showing both names side by side, tell me that too. This is where the real conversations happen on this channel. Share this with every family that has always believed their name was changed at the border, because the records are free, and the real reason behind your family's name is almost always a choice your own ancestor made on purpose.